Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Faith Divided, Christian Nationalism, and the Challenge of Catholic Social Teaching. And we are delighted to have our friends from the Sisters of St. Joseph among us. We have some Ursuline sisters among us. And we have some of our own associates and perhaps some of the Josephite associates. I don't know you well enough to tell. But to everyone, one and all, we welcome you to this presentation of this very important topic at this point in the life of the church and the life of our country and the life of our world. We're delighted that Rob Camerata, one of our associates, will be presenting. Rob is a committee member of the We Move Forward Together group. He's very skilled in a lot of things. He's got a great sense of humor, and was very brave to take this topic on. He has taught Catholic social teaching at Malloy University, but when we challenged him, would he try to put together Catholic social teaching and Christian nationalism, he said yes. I think he might have regretted it afterwards, because as you all know, if you've signed on to this, a very challenging topic. So with that, Rob, it's all yours. And thanks again for doing it.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I don't have anybody's pictures up because I can't really see who's here. So, because it puts black things on the screen when I do that. So I just trust that you're here, and I thank you. What we're going to be doing today, let me, this was what we said we were going to do, and it's basically what we're going to do. We're going to look at some of the clashes and connections between Christian nationalism and Christian thought. That includes Catholic social teaching, because Catholic social teaching really just is Catholic teaching. It's just a defined, a particular defined area of Catholic teaching. So we're going to see how some of this stuff has been impacting our lives. We already know how it's been impacting our lives to a degree with the division that exists in the church and the world today, and maybe some ways that we can navigate it. So my plan is to pretty much talk about our experience, some observations, talk about influencers, look at some of our traditional pieces that can inform us on all this stuff, look at the United States and Christian and some examples of how we see Christian nationalism taking form. We're going to look at racism, because there's a component to that we can't ignore, to Christian nationalism, and then hopefully a plan of action that will give us some things that we could do to probably help some of the relationships with people that we have that might be struggling with some of these challenges that we're faced with division. I'm going to ask you to do three things. I'm not an expert on any of this. I would like to think of myself as a facilitator in this process. So participate if and when you can. The only thing is, the way I'm moderating it today, I won't have access to see who's doing what. So Angela's going to let me know if anybody has any urgent concerns or anything like that. If you want a piece of paper, a pen to write down, if you have any questions, you want to save them for the end, or anything like that, feel free. And we just ask that everybody has an open mind, look inside yourselves too, and to try and embrace the topic with respect for anyone who speaks tonight. You know, there could be a variety of opinions. There certainly are. These are highly charged sometimes conversations around this kind of division that we're experiencing in our church and our world. So the more we can respect each other, and I don't think that's going to be a problem for us at all. All right, so I'd like to start with a breakout, which is a little odd, and that way we can, get to see who's here and all that. But we're going to do it, and I'd like to do memory lane, what I call memory lane. I used to have a boss in my bank when I worked in a bank who used to want to always go down memory lane. So, and I thought of also Barbara Streisand, The Way We Were. So what I'm going to ask you to do, these are discussion questions that I'm going to show to you when you're in the breakout room. I'm showing to you now, but you'll also see them when you're in the breakout room. And I want us to think, just for a few minutes, about what are your most fond memories from when you were growing up, and not like particular stories, more like general. People were more this, people were less that. Our church was more this, our church was less that, along those lines. So what I'll do now is I'm going to We'll put you into breakout rooms and just introduce yourselves and just ponder these questions, discuss with each other. Like, what was it? What do you remember? Like, what was it like when we were growing up? Our country, patriotism, like how it all played out. I just need 3 people on the microphone. Comments. How was it? The way we were.
Well, I think I said in my group, Rob, it's Suzanne, that people seem to have been more kinder and nicer, and you sort of felt like you knew each other. And Jenna sort of agreed with me on that.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you.
We talked a little bit about, Catholics marrying Protestants. Our parents, the church was stricter about getting married, had to get married in the rectory if you were a Catholic marrying a Protestant. So it just seemed there were a number of us that had that situation.
Okay, one more. Church or world or politics or anything like that. The way it was.
We talked about how the church was the center of everything. You prayed there, you played there, you learned there, you recreated there. And so there was a kind of sameness about everything, which made things go along very smoothly. I mean, and if you didn't agree, you certainly didn't say it. You just went along with stuff.
And you might not have not agreed ever.
You're afraid to disagree.
Yeah. Okay, so bottom line. Yes, there was a lot of validity to there's total validity to what everybody was saying. But there is a tendency when we look back to glorify the old days. Sometimes to generalize. So here's an example of what some people are feeling right now about democracy in our country.
Look, welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here. We'll replace it with this right here.
Amen.
That's right, because all glory is not to government, all glory to God.
By the way, did everybody hear? Can you hear the audio okay on that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an example of something that has been said. Just take a moment to read it. So this quote is attributed to Socrates in the 5th century.
Oh, wow.
Aside from dainties on the table, whatever that is. You can say this now. Plato attributed to Socrates, but some doctoral candidate in 1907 said it was him. So, so who knows really what the source is? But we used something like this at Malloy one time. I would talk with an education professor, and she brought something in like this, and it was from the 17th century, and it was basically saying how horrible the children of today are. Because on the same way that we can tend to glorify the past, we can also look at the present and think that it's the worst times ever. I mean, here's another example. This one's longer. Okay. This was in 1904. So these words, there are people who would say this today. So sometimes we tend to glorify the past and make it seem like it was a lot better than it was. And sometimes it was a lot better than it was. That just because we do it doesn't mean it's not true. And then the other thing that we tend to do sometimes is we look at the present and we think of all the worst possibilities and the worst things. How many people have been, the end of the world is near, on the corner, street corner, giving out little Bible tracts. The end is near. The end is there. This has been going on forever. How many, religions try to guess the date or time, the end of the world? You had what with the Mormons, was it, or other groups, and so on. So, this has been going on forever. So we tend to glorify the past, and sometimes the past was glorified. And then we also tend to look at the present and look at it as pretty bad. So all of this stuff that we have with us are like lenses that we put on when we get on in the morning. Like we put on these sunglasses. This is the image you might have seen the sunglass image in the prior slides. You're going to see it throughout the presentation. Because what I want us to do, what I hope that we do, and what I maybe do too much in my own life, is analyze what are the lenses that we put on every day. What's the worldview that we put on, and where does it come from? And it comes from all over the place. So what lenses are you wearing? What lenses are people who are on what we would call maybe the polar opposite side of us? What lenses do they have on? And what stuff gives color to those lenses? All right. So without going into a breakout room, I just want to, if people could just in the chat room, maybe I'll open that up and just go in there and just put just things that contribute to all the different cultural realities, social realities, everything that we have going on in those lenses. We're going to call them influencers, and I'm using that word intentionally, and I'll explain in a minute. What are some influencers that are out there? And you just need words. Technology, for instance, on the bottom right. Country, patriotism, social media, Suzanne wrote. Anybody, social media, politics. Yep. Demographics, like age is at play. You at 10 is very different than you at 60. Government leaders and how you're being influenced. So age influences you, sex or gender influences you, sports figures. What else? If we were to spend time with this, which we're not going to, we could come up with easy 1,000 things that are our influences.
And parents.
Economics. Your parents, of course, the family of origin.
Yeah. My niece and I are always fighting this.
Yes. So all of these things influence us all the time, and they form what is on our sunglasses. They form the color of our sunglasses. And some of those things work well with each other, and some of those things sometimes are in conflict with each other, and they coexist. We're wearing those lenses. So it's important to look at the whole role of influences in our lives. And people are writing other stuff too. Ethnicity, believing believing either than, yes.
Either or rather
or
than
both,
and.
Either or both and. So our beliefs, our values, how we view sex, how we view the world, how we view technology, how technology has influenced us, money, all of that stuff influences us. Now, those of us in the church, and I've heard it many, many times, and I probably have said it myself over the 40-something years I've been doing this, we tend to, I think, sometimes look at these influences as being not as important as others. Like maybe our church influence was the biggest influencer. But the reality is, and we learned this especially around the time of Vatican II and after, the cultural realities that were going on in America, the women's liberation movement, the sexual revolution, the rock and roll, all the different things. We had unprecedented amount of change in the West in the shortest amount of period in pretty much recorded history. Unprecedented amount of change. All right. So all of that change on some level or another influenced us and changed the colors of our lens. So as much as I'd like to think the church is the biggest influencer or my faith is the biggest influencer in my life, I might even really believe that, and it may be true. But it's also true that there are all these other influences around us that impact us and affect us. And make us look at the world, or enable us or hinder us from looking at the world in a holistic way. All right, let me just close some of these things that are blocking your screen. All right, there we go. So we have all of these things, and they're all operating. There's me in the middle, right? So we got what it means to be American. I remember when the earliest political memory I have, most of you will remember this, was when President Kennedy got shot. And I was only like 4 years old or something like that, or 5. And I remember I was downstairs at my aunt's house, and I ran up. She said, "Go tell your mother the president was shot." I had no idea what any of that really meant. And I remember going upstairs. But I remember what happened after that. I remember my mother crying. I remember everybody freaking out for like days, kind of like after 9/11 when what I knew about 9/11. But in my childhood memory, it was like a dark mantle went over us. So that all influenced us, our Christian values, our Christian faith, our patriotism, all of these things. Like, again, there's thousands of things that influence us all the time. And we need to be attentive to them, because they're what's coloring our lenses. So, if we look at ourselves, it's easy to look at the other person. We look at ourselves, the color of the lens, what's in there, and there's a lot of stuff. All right. Basically, why? Because we're complex human beings. I mean, we are, it's almost nice to think of things in black and white terms sometimes, because it seems neat, it seems tidy, and all of that. But the reality is we're very complex. All of those influencers affect us. Everything affects us. Almost every experience we have affects us on a certain level or another. So how do we navigate all this? How do we put it all together as Christians in particular? How do we navigate it all and put it all together so that it makes sense, and so that we learn how to live and interact with each other in a nice way? That's a good question. So let's look at some of our basics. And again, there's not a person in this room who doesn't know any of this stuff, but it's good to look at it. All right, message of Jesus basically is love God, love neighbor, and live right. All right, that's basically the bottom line, if you boil it all down. All right, that's also, by the way, the basis for Dominican life. That's the basis for Franciscan life, for Josephite life, for Jesuit life, for Catholic social teaching. It's the basics of Christianity: love God, love neighbor, and live right. So I have quotes here from Scripture, and I have from Pope Benedict. So love is not just something that's a more command that we have to do. It's a response. So love is active. It's responsive. You cannot have, I used to draw on the board, the cross. You had to have the relationship with me and God. That's me and God. But then there's a relationship with us. Some nun taught me that somewhere over the years. Right? And then love neighbor, the same kind of thing in Romans. And then we have Vatican II in the church, the document on the church in the modern world, that, not only does our action loving God is critical, but loving neighbor includes especially those who are poor or vulnerable or afflicted in some way. All right, and then living righteous. So this is from Laudato Si, from Pope Francis, and he basically says that we must proceed in line with the divine order set in creation. In other words, we are ordered to love God and neighbor. We are ordered to love God and neighbor and to live right. We're disordered by sin, all right? But we're ordered to love God and neighbor. That's the way God created us, to be with him and in him. So one of the things that always intrigues me about Catholicism in particular is we try for 2,000 years to maintain a balance, a very hopefully healthy balance between unity and diversity. All right, because I think the way of our ecclesiology, the way we view the church, all right, and the role of the hierarchy, and the role of the hierarchy is to keep us one. That's one of its primary roles, which is interesting, because why is some sections of the church trying to divide us? I don't know. But that is one of the primary roles of the hierarchy, is to keep us one, because of that mark of the church, all right, that we strive, the ideal, one holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Holy meaning striving for holiness, Catholic meaning universal, apostolic meaning moving out of beyond ourselves. But that idea of one, and that's throughout Christianity. So that needs to be a goal, a major goal for us, unity. But that doesn't mean sameness ever. It doesn't. Even now in the history of in the Catholic Church, we have what, 20, I think it's 26 rites in the Catholic Church. So there's diversity all over the place, but we're united, and the Pope for us is the visible sign of that unity, which represents Jesus. So do we do it well? Sometimes we do, but one of the greatest scandals we have in the Christian church, probably the biggest scandal is, although there are others, we're not one. Yet we say we are every time we profess the creed. I believe in the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, but the reality is we're fractured and we're broken. So that the division is in us. It exists. All right. And it comes from all of the influencers that we have. And again, here we are as Christians trying to navigate all this. How do we live together? How do we love God? How do we love our neighbor? How do we live righteously? So then we got the whole Dominican story that enters it and helps us in another way to add to our lenses how we look at the world, the quest for truth, the preaching, going out to the world, the four pillars of service, community, spirituality, and study. All right, all of that is there to inform us as well, to influence us. So we have the Catholic teachings, we have the Dominican take on it, and then other stuff. So we have some saints and the general masters of the order from the last century and into this one. The thirst for justice is what keeps us human. It's the fire that we keep alive in us. So we love God, we love our neighbor, and we live right. All right? It's just a restatement of basic Christian values. All right? And charity, according to Thomas Aquinas, is the most perfect friendship, living in charity. So this other great thing that one of the main, one of the main reasons why I wanted to connect with Dominican spirituality was I was fascinated with this whole concept of disputatio, because I was always the kind of person that would always want to be right. Always want to be right. And I will, if I know I'm right, I will argue till that's the way I was for a long time in my life. And I had kind of like influences that helped me get that way. I studied theology, I studied philosophy, and was breaking things down and analyzing things for perfection was the goal. I was off on the kind of perfection that I was called to, but that's what I did for a long time. So this concept of disputatio came to me when I started to study more about the Dominicans years ago. And it's fascinating to me because I don't know how to do it that well. I'm not a very good listener. I really have to work hard at that, and to have that kind of honor and reverence for your opinion in our conversation. Being receptive to your point of view, even if it's different than mine. That's tough for me. That's very tough for me. Because I know I'm right, So I work on this stuff, So look what Timothy Rath, the whole idea of being open to the other. So this is part of what I chose to have in my sunglasses, So now I got to grapple with that. And how do I do that? Because quite frankly, in the last couple of years, there are certain people within my family that I'd rather not speak to because of the division that's going on. That's horrible. I've been really reflecting on that a lot in the last 6-8 months. People I love, my siblings even, that I'd rather not talk to because of the way they believe things. I'm saying that I can't live my life that way. There's something profoundly wrong here. So I try to understand, all right? And I'm trying to engage. I try disputatio, not too much with my siblings because that's hard, but I try it with other people. It's always easier to do stuff outside of the immediate home.
Yeah.
So how do we put it all together? We got the Catholic stuff, we got the Dominican stuff, we got now we're going to look at what the social teaching of the church is. And basically, Catholic social teaching, all it effectively is Catholic teaching that has come down to us through the scriptures, primarily in the parables and healing message of Jesus, and certainly in the tradition of the church as it has been handed down, and in formal ways, in formal documents. The first one they say was Rerum Novarum in 1891, papal proclamations and apostolic exhortations and encyclicals and other things, pastoral letters and things like that have come out from bishop conferences and all that form part of the tradition of the church and that are official church teaching, but is often called the best kept secret in the Catholic Church. I remember in 1980, I was in my first graduate school, and I remember I was teaching in a high school in New Jersey, my first parish that I worked in, and the nun, a very forward-thinking Sister of Charity of Convent Station. She was the principal, and she said, "Robert, I want you to teach Christian social justice," because I was teaching religion there. And I said, "Okay, sister." I was 21 years old or whatever I was. I said, "Oh, sure. And you're going to have 38 high school seniors." "Okay, I can do that." I had no idea what Christian Catholic social teaching was. No clue whatsoever. There was one textbook I found out at that time that existed, written by a nun, and it was called Faith and Justice. I even remember the book. And I asked the principal if I could buy it, and then they had no money, so we used it the same every quarter. But anyway, the thing was, I didn't learn anything about specifically labeled Catholic social teaching in 1980. I remember when I was a DRE in Port Washington in 1982, and I remember getting mail, and talked about something about Catholic social teaching, and that's after I taught it. Like, we don't really do that. We're in a parish. Nobody really does that. We have peace and justice maybe, and that's it. But anyway, so they call it the best kept secret, and largely because some of the documents and their teachings are politicized and ignored by some factions of our church. But you can't ignore Catholic social teaching any more than you can ignore the doctrine of the Trinity. It's official teaching of the church. All right. So we need to give serious intellectual assent to it. So what the bishops did in the United States probably about 15, 20 years ago is they said, how can we summarize all of these hundreds of documents that popes have written, and bishops and all that? How can we put it all together and make it seem something that people can touch or seem more practical? So they came up with actually 11 principles. But 11 is not a good number for Catholics. We like 3, 7, and whatever. So then years later, they signed it. They lowered it down to 7. And so there's 7 main themes of Catholic social teaching, which I always take. I'm not the only one who does this. And it really comes down to 2 principal teachings in all of Catholic social teaching. And that is the primacy of the life and dignity of the human person. Like in our the lenses that we put on as Catholics, human dignity is it. It's the queen mother of all of our social interaction. Human beings have a dignity in them that God has given that no one can take away. That's a core belief. That's a doctrine. All right. So that is at the basis. If you look back at all the other 7 teachings, even the last one, they're not in any particular order, but care for God's creation, that has that component to it too. They all do have a component to it of human dignity and respecting and honor human dignity. Why does human work have dignity? Because human beings do it, and human beings have dignity. So that's a principal Catholic social teaching. The other principal Catholic social teaching that is present and evident in many of the other themes is the common good, the concept of the common good. And that's not in the same way that some people think of the common good in a political sphere necessarily, where it has maybe communistic implications for an economy or something. The common good basically means that we are to promote value systems and ideas where there are not necessarily winners and losers. So we have a different construct. The construct is what Saint Irenaeus said in the 4th century. The glory of God is the human person fully alive. So the construct is, what does it take for that individual, for that group of people to be fully alive? So Catholic social teaching would provide some guidelines or some teachings or some helpful ideals to help us achieve that idea of being fully alive, that ideal and idea, so that there aren't winners and losers. But yet, how do we put this all together? Now, remember, we got a lot in our glasses. We put a lot in those lenses. We have those 1,000 things that we didn't name, but we named some of them. Then we have Catholic teaching. Then we have our Dominican tradition. Then we have Catholic social teaching. And we got to put this all together and have it make sense. So another piece that I want to add to the puzzle, just to make it even more complex, is how we view evangelization in the Catholic Church. This was another thing that we weren't taught in the 70s and 80s, early 80s in theology, or at least I wasn't. And so I remember, again, being a DRE in Port Washington. Port Washington was a key place for me. I threw out a lot of mail, and something would come in about evangelization, and I remember saying, oh, Protestants do that. And I actually physically remember taking that envelope and throwing it in the garbage. We don't do anything with that. That's Protestant. All right. But what I've learned, evangelization is probably the central mission of the Catholic Church. All right. Now let's think about all the implications of that. All right. So you got Pope Paul VI and forget my Latin. I got a C+ and a D+. All right. So about that's when it really was given a lot of fuel, was in 1975 by apostolic exhortation by Pope Paul VI. Then later on, John Paul, and there were a lot of things on evangelization. Even Pope Francis is even talking on the joy of the gospel and all that. So evangelization is a big chunk. It's supposed to be a big chunk of the lens that we wear as Christians and as Catholics. So it's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to, I remember learning this in theology, and I remember teaching it for all these years. The role of the layperson in the world is to transform the world to Christ. Well, what does that mean? How do we do? So we were taught, you go out into the world, into the workplace. They used to call it marketplace spirituality. Remember that, when that was a big thing, in the 80s or 90s? Mm-hmm. You bring it to the workplace. Well, what are you bringing? You're bringing your faith. You're bringing stories of your faith. You're bringing experiences, hopefully, that inviting people to experiences. We were taught to transform this political sphere too. And that's where we get a little messy. All right? Because now we're stepping on territory that we were taught by the influences in our life. Never talk about religion and politics. Those are the two things you always avoid talking about with your family or Thanksgiving or something like that. Right. But now this is a big chunk. Probably many theologians would say the central mission of the Catholic Church is to evangelize, or is certainly one of the central missions. So what I'd like to do is I want to play with evangelization, because it really has a lot to do with Christian nationalism, and it doesn't. But let's just look at evangelization itself and our experience and what we think. How can we participate in the public sphere in the most essential mission of the church, which is evangelization? How can we do that respecting the dignity of each human person, which was Catholic social teaching, honoring the separation of church and state, which is politics, and promoting the religious freedom of all people, which is both what the church teaches and what the Constitution talks about in American politics. So what I'd like to do is, I'm going to give you a little more time for this, because this is big to flesh out. How can we participate in the public sphere in this mission of evangelization in a country as diverse as the United States of America, while doing those three things? What I would like to do is, if I can get two people maybe to just offer some insights into this particular question, which is a little multifaceted.
Rob, we were talking about in our breakout session that the first and the third one are, I can relate them to our whole call as Dominicans to preach, and so we don't normally, we don't always preach with our words, with what we say, but we preach with our actions, by who we are, by how we interact with other people. So I think that is certainly a way of evangelizing. We tell our kids all the time, we preach with the pulpit of our lives. That's who you are, is what people are going to respond to. But we were just talking about the middle piece, the church and state issue. It's a very delicate issue because in our group, we were saying that the church and the state have basically crossed over lines. The church has interfered with the state, and the state has interfered with the church, which causes a tremendous amount of lack of dignity for many people, many people. So that was what we were thinking.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Can we get maybe one more?
Honora's.
Yes. I agree with what Gina said, but the problem is people have to know who you are. You can preach with your actions, but they need to know who you are. And so I've come to realize that the best way for me to participate in the political process is to be who I am, and not to hide who I am. So I said, I'm a poll worker. I work at the polls, and I have for the past 4 years. Everybody at our voting poll, and we're 3 polls there, know I'm sister. I don't talk about it, but I treat people very differently, and they'll tell me that. People love coming to my table. They have to know who we are. And I mean, I'm not in favor of a habit by a long shot, but that was distinguishing, they knew who we were. They have a difficulty in people knowing who we are right now. So they can see us doing great works, but they don't necessarily connect it to who we are. So I think you're right, but there's another piece of that.
Okay. All right, good. So let's move on. Thank you, everyone who participated and contributed. Thank you. But certainly we're starting, I know you're seeing the complexity here, and you might be seeing where we're going. I think Sister Margaret's seeing where I'm going. So I heard you in the group. All right. But we got to put it all together, right? So now, here's some things, because I thought about patriotism and I thought about nationalism. I know some people in my life who are very patriotic people. I'd like to think I'm patriotic too. So I found this thing from Charles de Gaulle, and I verified it. That's real. Patriotism is when love of your own people comes first. Nationalism is when hate for people other than your own comes first.
Wow, that's great.
This was Charles de Gaulle. So we're talking, what year was that? World War II, wasn't it? Right around then?
It's World War II. Yeah.
Yeah. So this had to be bubbling, right? Even back then, the whole nationalism issue. Now that was in France, but it's common, not just in the United States. So patriotism versus nationalism. In philosophy, we had a minor in philosophy in the seminary. Distinctions. That's a critical distinction. I could be patriotic without being a nationalist.
Right.
And most of us are patriotic without being nationalist. But what's a nationalist? Let's look at some of that. Okay, here's an example of Christian nationalism.
Before marching to the Capitol, members of the far-right, violent Proud Boys knelt in the street and prayed in the name of Jesus to restore their, quote, value systems and to give them divine protection in what they were about to do. In the crowd attacking the Capitol were crosses and signs saying things like Jesus 2020 and Armor of God. Some told reporters they were there to join a fight of good versus evil. And when insurrectionists broke into the Senate chamber, in addition to rifling through senators' papers and scrawling messages to Vice President Pence, they prayed.
Jesus Christ, we invoke your name. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists and the globalists that this is our nation, not theirs. That we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray.
The problem isn't that the
Okay, here's another one.
Reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
Okay. Here's another recent thing. This is actually before, I believe it was before he was speaker. Just take a moment to read it. So it could look like a desire for evangelization. Couldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now here's the problem. Which church, which denomination are we talking about that should govern this state? The entire Christian church? The Catholic Church? I don't think any of them mean the Catholic Church.
No.
So which denomination of Christianity, which expression of Christianity? And we have various expressions of Christianity within even our own church, in the Catholic Church. We have the conservatives, we have the liberals, we have the moderates, we have everything in between. So when they say the church should run the state, who? What church? Which church? And who in those churches? So this was another thing I found that I thought was really good too. To just juxtapose nationalism and patriotism, which I think is a critical thing that we have to do here. Because there's nothing wrong with being patriotic. All right? At least in my opinion. Which of course is the correct opinion, right? So nationalism. Just checking to see if you're awake. If we were in the room, you would have laughed probably. So nationalism is belief that your nation sits the top of a hierarchy of nations. So your interests are inherently more important than those of any other country in the world. This was some PhD guy wrote this in his dissertation. Nationalists in government are reluctant to engage in global cooperation because they see geopolitics as a zero-sum battle of nations. Whereas patriotism is more, you love your own nation without necessarily thinking it's objectively better than anyone else's. But don't we always think that whatever we're doing is better than everybody else's anyway? Isn't that like a human thing?
Well, American exceptionalism, Rob, in that phrase, American exceptionalism.
That's right. Right? So we can be patriotic, but the problem comes in when we're nationalistic. And when it's Christian nationalism, I think it's even more problematic for us. So Lauren Glover talked about the First Amendment, or actually she called it a letter, but that's where the Establishment Clause was, and the free exercise of religion was in the First Amendment, which we all know. Now, the Catholic Church is a strong advocate and supporter of freedom of religion. The U.S. bishops came out with a pastoral years ago on it. It's been there's movements for it. We're very much behind religious freedom. Why?
Dignity of people.
What? I'm sorry, I didn't hear, sis.
Oh, I said we believe in the dignity of all people.
Yeah, we do. Yep. Why else? Religious freedom. Practical reason.
Yeah, we wouldn't be free then.
Yeah. Could we open a? I mean, look at what happened in this country, especially in the early days when the immigrants first came, the Catholic immigrants. There was a lot of anti-Catholicism. You had the Know Nothing Party. You had the KKK. You remember there's a story about the seminary in Huntington and how that wasn't going to be built because they didn't want it up there, and the Know Nothing Party was big and all that. There's all kinds of history around this. So the Catholic Church, especially since the establishment of the United States, came out very strongly with the concept of freedom of religion, and it's part of our Catholic social teaching. So Pope Paul VI, that's when it really was given impetus at Vatican II, the idea of religious freedom. Not religious exception, or that not religious dominance, religious freedom. So some say, well, what was the worldview? See the lenses there. What color of what colored our glasses when the American experiment was created 200 something years ago? It was built on these principles: liberty, equality, democracy, justice, independence, diversity, opportunity. In theory, that's how we were built. That was the ideal. I don't know about you, but most of my life I struggled trying to live the ideal. But the ideal, we need the ideal. We need to have what we need to know what's best for us. Even though we fall short of it. So anyway, all of these things are part of the lenses that we put on as Americans, you would think. The founding fathers, they say, well, they founded the country to be Christian. Well, as it turns out, if you look at the religion of the founding fathers that wrote the Declaration, you will see that really wasn't the case. They all weren't very strong in their Christian faith. As a matter of fact, Franklin wasn't a Christian. All right. Neither was Jefferson. But they sympathized with the Christian morality. Jefferson did. Madison was the one who was really the advocate. They call it Madisonian democracy. And one of the hallmarks of Madisonian democracy was religious freedom, a hallmark of the founding fathers. Clearly. Now we get to some concerns that people express. These are things that I hear. I've heard this way before the Christian nationalism thing was on the scene, some of these things. But I hear it in the church. I hear it in conversations about almost everything. We never did that before. It's not the same. The USA was always a Christian nation. That I hear more now. They're taking our jobs, whoever they are. We're being replaced. They think differently than us. I don't like change. We are in really bad shape. Something has to be done, much like the children in the time of Plato or 1905. Something has to be done about those kids. All right? So this is what people are some of what they're feeling. What else do you think people are expressing and saying these days about division, about this whole, you see the us and them in the background there, that whole construct of us and them? What are some other things that you've heard or that you might have said or that you might say?
Well, I think that the whole sexual revolution and the diversity, LGBTQ thing is really scaring people. They think we're going to hell in a handbasket,
Especially the trans stuff. There's a lot.
Yes.
I see that more than by my own observation, especially with the transsexual stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and even the church recently,
Yeah, just the other day it came out.
2 days ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's some controversy around that. So, Christian nationalism. I put up here 2 books that are the exact opposite of each other. Not that I'm asking you to read them, but just to show the juxtaposition. Some view it as a guide for taking dominion and discipling nations from the Bible, and others might view it as a threat to American democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So now you have 2 very different sunglasses. Very, very different sunglasses. Even though some of the other stuff that we have in our sunglasses might be in there, the person on the left who takes that view has a very different sunglass lens on than I have, and the person on the right might have a different sunglass lens than I have. So, but this is all at play, right? So Now, what is Christian nationalism? And then Margaret, you were mentioning this in the group before. Like, what is this? What is it actually? It's basically a belief system that combines Christian beliefs, not so much doctrinal beliefs, all right, not about Trinity and stuff like that as much. It might have placed God first, that kind of language. God is everything, God is first. But it's not going to talk about the triune God or something like that necessarily. It's more about basic, very well, those are basic Christian beliefs also, but it's more like basic Christian principles of God being in charge. All right, Christian nationalism can vary in intensity. There's degrees of it, just like there is with anything else, among individuals and groups who identify with it. So what are some of the tenets of or the foundational principles of Christian nationalism? All right, so Margaret, you said that this is what you said before, and you're right. The idea that the United States was founded as a Christian nation and that its laws and institutions should reflect Christian values. Period. 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 So because Christianity was the dominant religion, it may still be right now, but it's changing. And that's part of the problem too. All right. But because we were the dominant religion for a long time, and because some of the founding fathers were Christians, and because many of the American population have been Christian over the 2 centuries, all right. Well, of course we were founded as a Christian nation. I would say that some of our laws were based on Christian principles. There's no doubt about that. But those are principles, generally, that people of goodwill of other denominations or no religion might have as well. All right? So anyway, that's one of the central tenets, is that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, and it needs to be a Christian nation. Identity preservation, that's another thing. All right? Christian identity has to be promoted in culture and society. Now, I've even said stuff like this in terms of the church. Well, back when I was growing up, there was a Catholic subculture. There's no subculture now in the Catholic world, so that's why we lost a lot of our identity. All right. And then there's some truth to that. But this is basically saying that everyone in America has to have Christianity promoted to them as part of their culture, no matter what they are, what their religious affiliation is, or their beliefs, or whether they have any or not, doesn't matter. Then the idea that Christians in America should have privileged positions, especially in government and education. And then the other thing is there's a staunch opposition to any form of secularism. But again, remember, there's not common agreement on what all these things mean, because it could look very differently. And then traditional values. And that, remember back in the 80s or the moral majority and all that, that's when a lot of that was brewing. And Catholics believe in traditional values as well, And then the idea of that there's just not enough Christianity in our society and we need to have it more. One of the things I hope one of the people in one of the groups brought up in the first brainstorming tonight was the way it was years ago. Like, remember Sundays, what Sundays were like? Almost all the stores were closed. Why? Because it was to go to church and family day and all of that. Well, that's gone. All right. So they're concerned about that. So there are some concerns, but the way people take it and live it out and bring it to more extreme conclusions, that is the problem. One of the problems. So this whole idea of, and reality of us versus them. And I put this in the middle here for a reason. These are wires. I don't know why, but it seems to me that we are wired with us and them.
Mm-hmm.
We're wired for that. From when we're little, we might be taught some of it. And some of it just is, even in sports, right? There's always an us and them, so we have this real construct out there. So we're wired for the us and them. But meanwhile, that's in our lenses too, right? Because that's part of our sunglasses. But look at all that other stuff that's in our sunglasses that talks about unity, through diversity and other things like that. So that's what I'm saying, how to navigate it all for me personally. So if I'm struggling with that in my own life, I don't know what the Christian nationalists are doing, but they're motivated to do extreme things. Why? What's behind the scenes? Fear. There was a Josephite nun that I had on a retreat years ago. She was leading it. I don't know if she's still around. She was an excellent Sister Ronnie Mirth, I believe. And I believe
she's around.
Okay. This was like 40 years ago. So I remember her doing a session at the seminary, and it was on well, one of the things she mentioned was, I'm quoting her, by the way, let her know that I'm quoting her. But that the root of prejudice is not hatred. The root of prejudice is fear. And that was a pivotal moment in my life, because I was brought up to this and all that, and I thought, my God, and that made me examine my own life and think about that. And with fear, I've noticed and I've read, there's unhealthy fear and there's healthy fear. You know, you go to the stove when you're 3 years old, the flame is on, you put your finger in it, you get burned. All right, you're afraid to touch the stove again when the flame is on. That's healthy fear. But unhealthy fear is debilitating. Unhealthy fear causes anxiety. And what we pray at the end of the Our Father at every Mass, protect us from all anxiety. So the church and God, everybody knows we're going to have anxiety. And that usually comes from fear. Fear feeds anxiety. So that is definitely operating, maybe in us, but certainly in the Christian nationalists. All right? Power structures are threatened. Who has the power? Those people, them, are starting to take the power. That's a problem. All right. Perceived competition. Well, that kicks into what we've been wired for. Our team has to win over that team. I mean, cultural preservation. We want to keep our Christian culture. Well, we're going to have Muslim federal holidays? What is that about? We're a Christian country. Social cohesion rather than social diversity. All right. We all, and I heard some people in the breakout room before say, well, we all kind of did the same thing. And that was in the glory days. So maybe the Christian nationalists are looking at that too and saying, gee, what's happening now is wrong. Economic impact. All right. It affects the economy, it affects the way we do things, security concerns. Am I safe? I remember after 9/11, my wife's brother died in 9/11, his third day in the building. And I remember people in the family saying how much they hated Muslims. And I remember saying, well, it was a bunch of, 140, whatever it was, who were involved in that, but it wasn't the millions of Muslims. You can't blame all the Muslims any more than you can blame all the Christians for anything we did bad and have done for centuries and centuries. All right. But that is a real concern. See, I'm trying to figure out the why in myself and in them. You know what I mean? And then political considerations, obviously. And then here, I think, is a big thing. And when you look at this topic of racism, white Christian nationalism, you'll see the more liberal writings. They call it white Christian nationalism because they don't want to separate the race issue from Christian nationalism. And I understand that, all right? Because I think racism is the big elephant in the room, has been, will be, and is, all right, in general, all right? And so much so the popes have addressed and all kinds of things. So it just brings the us and them more to the front. And the racism is really mostly, I'm talking about mostly people of color here. But there's other kinds of racism and discrimination as well. So is that the elephant in the room? Is that something that could be behind, and that is behind a lot of this? Because the brown, we even see I know I see it in our church, on Long Island. When I first started working with the diocese in 1998, I think there were 30 parishes that had Spanish masses, and 20% they were saying at that time of the population were Hispanic. in our diocese. Now, St. Bridget's, it was 20%. Now it's over 50% are Hispanic at St. Bridget's. Over 50 now. The American church in Cara, if you look at Cara, the American church is becoming more and more Hispanic. There's lots and lots of reasons for that. All right. Or at least a few reasons for that. But there are people in our church who are afraid of that.
Mm-hmm.
Why? They're Catholics, you know, but because this elephant in the room that we often don't want to talk about, but yet it's speaking to us all the time. So the church has come out with official teaching every now and then on this, even though the church sometimes has not and does not live up to the ideal of not being racist. All right. The church has spoken officially in magisterium. The church has spoken in Gaudium et Spes, Vatican II. All right. Every form of social or cultural discrimination has to be eradicated because it's incompatible with God's design. It's not even close to what God wants for us. Brothers and sisters, to us, a document that back in the days when the U.S. bishops were producing document after document that was powerful punches to really give us the ideal to try and live our lives by. They were good back then with this stuff. And they came out with this document early on in 1979. They called racism a sin, which was fairly revolutionary in those days. A sin that divides the human family, blots out the image of God among specific members, and violates the fundamental human dignity. See, when you talk about human dignity, that's a Catholic social teaching document. All right. So this is considered a Catholic social teaching document, as well as Gaudium et Spes, as well as Fratelli Tutti from Francis. We cannot tolerate or turn a blind eye to racism and exclusion in any form, and yet claim to defend the sacredness of human life. And this is something that I heard one of the participants in the little breakout room that my phone went to, although I wasn't allowed to speak in it because I couldn't. But anyway, somebody said, it's all pro-life issues. You know, everything is pro-life. Well, if it affects human dignity, then it's a life issue. All right. All right. Now, this is another thing that was big in the 80s, and then with the two popes, with Pope John Paul II, and then with Pope Benedict, they started talking about structures of sin and social sin, and it was different. It was different than we had heard things said before, because sin, we knew there was a social component, but sin was, our focus for a long time was on personal sin. So what they said, what they both hinted at with this stuff is structures of sins. That's a structure that evolves and develops because of individual people have personal sin, but collectively, it's almost like the sin takes on a life of its own. Almost, it becomes a system, and so John Paul was like, we have to name that. We have to name the structures of sin. Like, for instance, one of the things I did at Malloy, the whole Jones Beach, and everybody knows that story about Jones Beach and Robert Moses and how that all came to be and how it was designed, built to keep out people of color. All right, that's a structure of sin that was promoted. Levittown. I hate to say it, as much as it had some good effects because it gave low-income housing to veterans, it was only white veterans. And that was in their documents, and it was only taken out in 1969. It was only available to members of the Caucasian race, Levittown. You could not buy a house in Levittown before 1969 if you were not white. That's called destructive sin. All right. Same thing. The U.S. bishops talk about social sin, which is the same kind of thing. And Benedict talked about social sin as well. So the idea that it's bigger than just my personal sin, which is bad enough, but there's a structure, there's a social system that has become sinful. And the Pope John Paul was like, we have to confront it. We have to call it out. We have to say that's sinful. And the bishops tell us that, and Benedict and Francis. All right, so now I'm going to end with, it's a few more minutes. What's the time?
It's 8:24.
Hey, what?
8:24.
All right. Then,
But
this is about 8 minutes. I can cut it a little.
It's okay.
All right.
go ahead.
Well, Christian nationalism is often heard in media and political circles, and this election year, you're going to hear a lot about this. Depending on the source, attempts to define the term paint it as more ominous than ever before. Well, CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody, brings us the story.
Since Donald Trump's entry into politics began with a ride down the Trump Tower escalator almost 9 years ago, the presidential candidate spoke directly to evangelical Christians, and many responded in kind. In 2024, not much has changed.
We have to bring back our religion. We have to bring back Christianity in this country.
Unfortunately, some who made their way inside the Capitol on January 6th echoed some of that same spirit.
Let's all say a prayer.
In the aftermath of those events, many news organizations took a closer look, resulting in stories such as the growing danger of Christian nationalism that's rooted in political power and even violence. Georgetown professor Paul Miller wrote the book, What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism?
There's a kind of nationalism that uses Christian language and symbols and rhetoric to advance its agenda. And it's bad. I think Christian nationalism is real.
But what is being included under the umbrella term Christian nationalism? And how widespread is it really? A new Public Religion Research Institute poll shows roughly 3 in 10 Americans qualify as Christian nationalist adherents or sympathizers. But in that specific survey, the criteria cites someone as a Christian nationalist if they believe the following: that the government should declare America a Christian nation, laws should be based on Christian values, that we will not have a country anymore if America moves away from our Christian foundations, being Christian is an important part of being truly American, and that God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. Well, that grouping could potentially include millions of Bible-believing, church-going Christians who don't view many or some of those concepts as radical at all. Russ Vought is the president of the Center for Renewing America, an organization devoted to restoring and promoting Judeo-Christian principles.
Their definition of Christian nationalism is something that obviously we reject. I mean, they're putting this in a bucket that is un-American. We're not talking about theocracy.
A recent Politico article painted Vought and the group as an organization developing plans to infuse Christian nationalist ideas in a new Trump administration. Vought sees that as a scare tactic.
We're a think tank. We have a policy bent towards us. We have goals that are 1 year, 5 year, 25, 50-year aims. And I would put Christian nationalism and really the desire for Christian nationalism in that bucket.
Vought says it's about preserving a Judeo-Christian heritage through sound public policy decisions.
I do believe that America has been, should be, and I hope it to be someday a Christian nation that affords religious liberty to everyone.
Miller and others see it differently. They feel Christian nationalists are more about pursuing special rights for Christians and not religious liberty at all.
A good litmus test here is, do you support the same freedoms and rights for non-Christians?
In one statistical litmus test, Pew Research shows that less than 1% of white evangelical Protestants actually believe Christians should get special rights. And of those who believe that the U.S. should be a Christian nation, only 24% think the federal government should advocate Christian religious values. About twice as many, 52%, believe the government should advocate for moral values that are shared by people of many faiths.
I'm going to cut it short, but you have the presentation. You watch more of it. But anyway, anything we watch or read, always look for the slant and the bias, because it's there. All right, so these were going to be our discussion questions, but I'm going to have to cut them. But we'll talk them out just for a second and maybe get one person to offer an idea. Put God first. What are the social, political, economic implications of that foundation Christian principles in our diverse society? Somebody want to just speak to that for a second, or 10 seconds, 20, a minute? Think about that. Put God first. Something I taught people in stewardship for years when I worked in the diocese. We used to tell them to put it on their envelopes for their parish, place God first. What are the political implications of that? I mean, does everybody believe in God?
Well, that's against to some people, that's against religious freedom. If you put in one church over another,
Yeah, yeah.
they take offense on that.
Right. We don't need to react to that, but these were some things.
Right.
Is there a difference between the drive for Catholic evangelization and the drive for Christian nationalism? That's something I'm struggling with. Because what motivates me to preach and to go out, well, the drive might be the same, but what we do with it could be different, in my opinion. Like I'm driven to the holy preaching, right? I'm driven to do what I do to evangelize. And that includes, I do public advocacy, I do New York State Catholic Conference, I do stuff with them and all that. So I'm driven. But at what point does it become unhealthy?
Well,
I'm
can I
sorry.
say something?
Yeah.
I think the other thing that enters in here is, for most people, the spokesperson for the Catholic evangelization is the U.S. Catholic bishops. And the U.S. Catholic bishops, I mean, I might answer this question very differently than the U.S. Catholic bishops do. So
bishops might answer among themselves as well.
Yeah, exactly. That really complicates matters.
It does. Yeah, we're complex people. All right. So what I wanted to also show you is, I think we need balance and healing. I have a plan of action very quickly. All right. Active listening. I was going to spend some time on that, but that's something I learned in PFI, and Suzanne was one of the teachers of that over the years. That whole idea of really listening to people. I stink at that. All right. I have to really work at that. Focus on shared values, because even with the people that I disagree with, there are things I agree with. This is what we used to say in ecumenism, right? Ecumenism. Focus on what you believe in common. All right. Shared values. Seek understanding. Like, I'm trying to understand some people in my family and friends. I'm trying more than I ever did since I had to do this, to tell you the truth. And then respect differences, collaboration, education, encourage education and exposure. And we got to be careful what we're reading and what we're viewing. And we got to look for the bias, smell it out, and remove it, and find the facts. And then learn how to handle conflicts better. Screaming at each other is not helpful, And then that whole idea of disputatio in the Dominican tradition, to be openly receptive to the other person's point of view. I'm not always right, but I'm concerned. So these are two resources. One of them is this book. If you want to get it, it's a great book. I read it, and he offers some historicity to the whole issue of polarization in the church. And on the right, that's the one on the right. And then he also offers some solutions. So it's pretty good. He's Glen Mary Home Missions. He does a lot of stuff, work with this polarization issue, and then Christian nationalism as well. And then this documentary you may have seen. I think it's on Netflix, God and Country. All right. If you haven't seen it, see it. Again, there's bias in there. There's bias everywhere. So you just got to smell it out, weed it out, and make up your own mind. And I wanted to also share with you, I have a website, my own. On there, I have a whole bunch of resources. So I'm going to show it to you just so you can get this presentation on there if you want to look at it. There's my family. But anyway, if you click at the top, Theological Resources, and you go down to Faith Divided, there you'll find the presentation. And then I put a whole bunch of things from different slants, but related to Christian nationalism. And you might want to read more about it, because we do need to learn more about all of this, because it's growing and it's affecting people we love too, And then also, I think that's it. Yeah. So this was just to give a little whet your appetite kind of thing, and maybe start a conversation, and maybe, it's a lot in this, and I hope it helped identify it a little bit clearer, maybe, and maybe helped a little bit in carrying the conversation forward. I thank you for your attentiveness and for your participation.
Thank you.
Rob. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks,
Rob.
Yeah.
All right,
Thanks,
take
Rob.
care.
It was terrific.
That's great
Terrific.
job.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
A lot to give us all a lot to think about here.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
to think of like I need
Thanks
more.
for all your work
Yep, thank you.
and your
I just want to
effort.
say, those of you who are interested in this topic, we have another 3-week event with Sister Vicky Told in May called, let's say, Pursuing Truth Together. It's a 3-week Zoom discussion on the book, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. So if you're interested in this topic, you might, want to join that one. And then in June, we're going to have another, Margaret, is it 1 or 2 sessions?
2 sessions, I think.
2 sessions with Vernice on the same kind of topic. So if you go to our website, wemoveforwardtogether.org, you'll see them listed. Okay?
Thank you, Ange.
All
Thank
right.
you, Ange.
Thank you all for